welcome to this episode of Behind the Wrestler for Season 3. My guest at this time is none other than the cigar-smoking, skull-crushing, Wolverine-looking and one half of SAS, Alex Savage. Thank you very much for taking the time out and joining us and giving us a Behind the Wrestler video.
Thank you very much for having me.
So first question that you're going to get asked plenty of times. Who, when and where inspired you to become a professional wrestler?
So my sort of first memory of wrestling was, I think, a 1989 SummerSlam, and someone had brought for show and tell SummerSlam 89 as their wrestling show, and I was just in primary school. I had no idea what pro wrestling was, and then they started playing this clip, and it started off with the Macho Man Randy Savage and Zeus and Sensational Sherry or Scary Sherry all round a cauldron, looking into the cauldron, what's going to happen, like in a match coming up with Hulk Hogan, and I was like, what the heck is this? Like, I was totally spellbound, and I just remember that the teacher was like, all right, like, let's turn this off now. I'm not really sure how this is show and tell, but this is stupid and we're turning it off right now. And I remember a group of us kids all at lunchtime asked if we could continue to watch it to see what happened, and then I saw Hulk Hogan and Brutus Beefcake, and it was like this just amazing spectacle, and these obviously larger than life characters. And I was just sort of, I don't know if that probably didn't set me off as wanting to be a professional wrestler, because I just didn't really understand. I was just a kid at that time, but it made me fall in love with professional wrestling. And this was at a time where just before wrestling got banned here in New Zealand for a little while, because kids were doing the moves in the schools and stuff like that, and there was this big backlash about it. And so it was actually very hard. I could only ever watch it at my friend's place that when they were, like, who were allowed to still watch it or who had it on tape. So it also made it an even more sort of unique, special thing, because I didn't have access to it all the time. But I guess from there I sort of, just caught bits and pieces until I was about 14 years old. And there was this sort of resurgence of wrestling in New Zealand because WCW was made available. Like they started airing it on free TV on Channel 2, and they started airing like the pay-per-views as well. And so the first thing I saw, I remember, I was just one afternoon, like, just watching the TV, and I saw the NWO come out, and I saw Hollywood Hulk Hogan, but now, my memories of him was this all-American good guy. Then I seen him, he was a heel, he was all in black, he was doing all this despicable stuff, and I was like, what? And then there was people running in and sort of attacking people, like, and this was all new to me in wrestling. In my head, it was all very straightforward, and there was no bad guys like this. And I saw Scott Hall and Kevin Nash for the first time. And I guess it was about that time that it really started falling in love with it, all over again. And I started really thinking that, hey, this is a path that I want to take. Like, I want to be a pro wrestler. And yeah, I was so Attitude Era and that sort of WCW 96, 97, 98, 99, that got me right back into wrestling, and like sort of, because it was now sort of much more available and we were watching it all the time and cutting promos on each other at school and trying to do the moves, and that's when I started really getting into it. But I think my biggest inspirations were, and they sort of changed, because also at this time I started going to the video store, and they essentially had sort of all the WWE pay-per-views from about 1986, 87 up until that time, 98, 99. So every weekend I would just hire 5 out, watch them all, and I was trying to go in sequence. So, I started off with, Hulk Hogan era, then into Bret Hart, then into Shawn Michaels, and sort of down the line. So I have many like sort of favorite wrestlers, but I guess the ones that influenced me the most, Macho Man Randy Savage was probably one of my favorites of all time. as was Scott Hall or Razor Ramon. Like, I think I always think about them as maybe my two biggest and favorite at that time. And then as I watched more wrestling, I sort of began to really appreciate the artistry and the craft of people like a Shawn Michaels was just the best wrestler. Bret Hart put on amazing matches, and so in WCW the cruiserweights like Eddie Guerrero or Dean Malenko or people like that. So I sort of was in love with these characters, like these bigger characters, and then I had my sort of worker wrestlers who I just really appreciated the stories that they told in the ring. And so very hard to say, what really set, I'm sure the Macho Man Randy Savage was what set me off on the thing, but then there's Scott Hall, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, people like that. And then also I love those larger than life personalities too, like The Rock and Stone Cold and all that sort of thing. But yeah, I think I'd go back to Savage, Hall, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart.
Nice. And then, after making the decision of actually I want to do this, when did you decide to look into training facilities here in New Zealand to attempt this dream?
So again, like, I sort of fell out with wrestling again. 16, 17, I was determined to become a pro wrestler, and I thought that's absolutely what I was going to do. But at the same time, I was falling in love with filmmaking and making movies, and I found that I was probably just as passionate about filmmaking and directing and acting as I was about this idea of becoming a pro wrestler. And so the pro wrestler became a bit more of a pipe dream, because I was like, look, I'm not a super athletic guy, I'm not this huge dude, I'm not 6'6", so what real place is there for me in that world? I'm not sure if there is. Whereas, none of those things matter as a director. You have to be a good storyteller, a good writer and all those things, but they don't require, you to be sort of like genetically a certain set of things. And so I really sort of forgot about wrestling for a while, although I sort of still kept, watching it. I still kept up with it to a degree, but I was not as involved. And so I think when I was 16, I made a bet with all my friends that I was going to become a pro wrestler. I was going to be in the WWE by the time I was 30.
Yeah. And
by sort of 17, 18, I had sort of no intention of doing that anymore. I was more thinking about I was going to be a super successful filmmaker by the time I was 30. Wow. So I was going down this filmmaking path, and I had been for sort of many, many years. I made a feature film, I've done a lot of stuff and still continue to do that. But I guess, fast forward to I'm sort of 33, 34, and I wanted to make a movie about wrestling, because from, I guess, the sort of about 2010, 2011, I started really following wrestling a lot more. CM Punk got me back into wrestling, basically. His style, his character, I just identified with that a lot, because I felt like he was more of just a regular dude. Awesome character, awesome personality, great storyteller in the ring, but he wasn't this jacked up massive dude. And in fact, he had this sort of resentment towards that style and that aesthetic, because he was like, that's not what wrestling's about. And so I was super into it, and initially I thought, look, I want to make a movie about this. What are the things that I love and know a lot about? And one of them was wrestling. And I was like, I want to make a movie about pro wrestling, and I want to sort of cover it in a different way to all the wrestling movies that had existed beforehand, and I wanted it to be more a bit of a Rocky story, I guess, and not pretending wrestling is not predetermined, and not pretending that it's a legitimate sport, but looking inside, like, the behind the scenes of pro wrestling as well, and why do some people get picked to be elevated up the card, and why other people don't, and sort of just the passion of the people that do it. And so I started thinking about that, and I started thinking that I wanted to be in that film, like I wanted to act in that film as well. And so I thought, well, look, you know, as much as a fan as I am, and as much as I know, I still don't really know. The only way I can really know is I need to get in that ring and start taking bumps and do the training at least for a while, so I can get a better idea to write that from that perspective.
Right.
And so I started thinking, okay, well, how do I get into wrestling in New Zealand? Is there any actual way? Is there any wrestling schools in New Zealand? And I basically just Googled it. And IPW Wrestling came up, and I got in touch with one of the people there, and they messaged me back, and they said, we actually have a tryout coming up, and it was in a couple of weeks or something like that. And so I went to this tryout and sort of did the tryout, and you know, obviously quite a I always knew it was going to be really hard, but it was still eye-opening, and considering like how unfit I felt doing it, and how out of shape I felt, and how uncoordinated I felt.
Right.
But like as soon as I sort of went to that first trial, I was like just so switched on. It was like I was 16 again, and like remembering like this is what I wanted to do. Like this is, you know, this was my other dream, and now here I am. Like, and again, I didn't really have too many expectations. I wanted to do the training, but I didn't know how far I could really get because I didn't know if my body would be able to handle it. Basically, you know, I'm older. I'm 34. You know, am I really going to be able to pick it up? But the more I did it, the more that sort of passion grew, and that little ember of that 16-year-old, that flame just kind of ignited and just got bigger and bigger, and I just did it more and more, and you know, it was trainings from once a week to 2 or 3 times a week. It was, you know, sort of annoying other people. It was starting to re-watch all those classic wrestling matches and try and understand why people did certain things or how they executed certain moves. And I just really kind of got re-obsessed with it in the same way that I'm obsessed with filmmaking. And at some point, and I don't know exactly when it was, I stopped thinking about it like, hey, you know, this is for this movie, and started more thinking about like, hey, I just want to just keep doing this. I just want to keep wrestling because it's so much fun and I'm getting so much out of it. And so at that point I was like, okay, now I'm just going to do this because I love it as well, regardless of whether I make this movie or not. That like now my goal is to try and become a good wrestler and try and sort of realize some of those dreams and goals that I had when I was 16, and so that's kind of how I got into it, and sort of after about 8 or 9 months I sort of had my first matches and sort of just things rolled on from there.
And like doing, like as you said, you knew it was going to be a hard tryout and obviously lots and lots of squats. And doing and going away from that and taking your first bump, what was the reaction of, okay, so the ring isn't actually a trampoline?
Yeah, it was certainly like a real eye-opener. And you know, like it was that thing where you think that the ring is going to be soft somehow, and when you like land on it you go, wait, so they're just landing on like this every single time they get hit with a move?
Yep.
Oh man. and I guess also thought, I was like, okay, that was really, really sore. I did not enjoy that at all. Can I really do this much more? Like, can I take many more of these and really, like, before my sort of back just breaks or something happens, because I don't know physically if I can maintain just taking bumps all the time, because it is so much worse than I thought it was. But as you go, you slowly do can get conditioned to it and get used to it. And honestly, every time I take the first bump, I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? But then after that, the sort of adrenaline kicks in and everything's all good. But yeah, that first bump, every training session or every match, I'm kind of like, God damn.
And then obviously, you mentioned 8 or 9 months down the track, you had a fair couple of matches, and then officially debuting on shows and officially being part of the IPW roster. What was the thought process of you finding out that, okay, I'm actually going to be part of the roster, this is actually going to happen? How did you prepare? What did you learn? And
well, to be honest, I was in train like at sort of like maybe the 3 or 4 month mark of my training. I was like, man, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to do this. Like, get me in there. I can't wait. And then after about 6 or 7 months, I was like, man, I know nothing. Like, I have so far to go. I feel so lacking in knowledge of how to wrestle. Like, I feel like there's just everything I do is not very good, and maybe I shouldn't ever debut. Maybe I shouldn't actually maybe I should train for another whole year before I step into the ring, because there's just what you find about wrestling is that it's the same with filmmaking. I think there's so many parallels, but it's all layers. So you learn that base layer, and then that just opens you up to another layer, and you learn that layer, and it just opens you up to another layer, and it's just never ending. You can never really become you just keep improving, and that's what makes it so great. But it also can be quite intimidating and daunting when you go, okay, I've learned how to do bumps, but now I've got to, what about being thrown over the rope, or what about learning this new move, or whatever it is, and suddenly you're back to being a complete novice again, you're a complete rookie again, even though you've been doing it for, a huge amount of time. You'll be introduced to a new idea, and it'll put you right back at square one. So, I was sort of in a phase of thinking man, maybe I'm just not going to debut for quite a long time yet. Maybe that's where I'm at. And the trainers are very cagey about it's kind of no one says anything to you. No one tells you, oh, well, we're thinking maybe next month you'll debut, or oh, we're thinking maybe you're not ready, you need to work harder, or we're thinking maybe you are ready. Nothing is ever told to you. And so I just kind of kept showing up to the shows and filming them, and then sort of made the choice, and I can't remember whether they said I think they kind of said maybe you'll have some matches at an Armageddon in Wellington,
right?
And they're like, maybe you'll have some matches, so bring your gear. But they'd said that to me before,
right,
and they hadn't used me,
right?
So I was kind of like, okay, well, I will, but I'm not actually necessarily thinking that I'm going to. And then I think the first show I was wrestling, the first show we did, I was wrestling twice, and I absolutely freaked out, and I was what, super nervous, and super it's just very sort of anxious about that. But I think that it helps that I am a little bit older, and that gives you sort of, I guess, ways to sort of calm yourself down, and it gives you a little bit of pause for reflection to go, okay, look, it's just a wrestling match, and it's just one match. If this one sucks, maybe the next one won't suck as much.
Right.
And to have that perspective, whereas I think if I debuted when I was in my sort of 20s, I would feel terrible after every match, because if I did badly, I would feel like the whole world was ending, So yeah, they sort of, I wrestled on that, and then I brought my gear to the next show, but again, I wasn't booked, I wasn't planning on wrestling, and then someone either couldn't wrestle that they were planning on, or they needed an extra match on the card, I can't remember. And so I then did have my sort of official debut, although it wasn't really meant to be, because they're like, well, who's around? put him in and and beat him up for a while.
Yeah.
And so that's what they did. And again, that was another sort of level, because at the Armageddon shows, you're in front of maybe 50, 100 people, but it seems like a lower pressure environment, and then you debut against someone on the main show, and all those people are concentrated on you and looking at you. Obviously, I didn't have to worry too much. That match was against Charlie Roberts, so he sort of led me through and guided me through, and it was pretty short match, made pretty short work of me. I couldn't make too many mistakes, I guess.
Right.
But then after that, I guess they decided that, like, okay, he's ready. He's ready enough to. So I was sort of on main shows ongoing from there, and sort of continued to wrestle, I guess, for the next sort of maybe 3 or 4 months, or 3 or 4 shows just exclusively for IPW, and then I started to be able to get bookings for other promotions as well.
And then, you mentioned, your first official debut against was Charlie Roberts, and he is the bar in New Zealand. If you want to make a name for yourself, if you want to, I'll make you famous kind of thing is his gimmick. He is the man to go up against. If you want to make a name for yourself, he is the man to go up against, and rightfully so, because he worked his ass off to get to where he is, because he was told he would never be a wrestler and never be able to do the things that he does now, and he's proved everybody wrong. Getting to wrestle Charlie Roberts for a glimpse, and then down the track getting to wrestle him for a lot longer. What was the learning curve and the thought process of wrestling essentially your mentor who took you under your wing?
Yeah, well, look, I think I've learned a lot from Rob, or Charlie Roberts. Like, I've learned the most from him, and he is absolutely my mentor and the person that I attribute a lot of my growth for as a wrestler as I was training. Like, after I was taught the basics, after I was taught all that stuff, it was his sort of guidance and, helping me through, when he sort of came on board to train on those Tuesdays. That really helped me evolve and get better and think about wrestling in different ways. And that continues to this day. So at the time, I maybe didn't appreciate how great a wrestler he was. And, just over time, I've learnt to sort of respect him more and more for the work that he puts in, and for the sort of, like how good he is and the opportunities that he's helped to give me, which I think is very important to acknowledge. But I think one of the things that I learned the most from him is how selfless he is in the ring. You get a lot of people that are kind of come in and you wrestle them, especially when you're starting off, and they go, cool, I'm going to do this. I don't really care what you're doing because I'm not really interested.
Right.
And that's not his approach. Is very much how can he, like, whether he's winning or losing, he's always thinking about how he can make his opponent look good and how he can help his opponent get better. And so I think one of my biggest takeaways is, like, don't be selfish in that ring. Always be thinking about how you're going to help your opponent as well. And I think that was a huge takeaway and a huge positive thing for me to kind of go forth in the wrestling, taking that approach, because it's certainly not always the case with New Zealand wrestlers or wrestling and the way people think, and I want to kind of follow in his footsteps in the way that I wrestle people. So I probably didn't realize quite maybe how much he was helping me and how big a deal it was at the time. I've only grown to appreciate that as time has gone by. And even in that match, perfect example, he was like, it was just meant to be pretty much a squash match, and he was meant to sort of just hit a bunch of stuff and go home. And you know, we were out there and he was like, yeah, hit me with some stuff, and I was like, well, what? and you know, that's just the way he is. Like, even though he was actually injured at the time, so he had an elbow injury, which actually turned out he had a broken elbow at the time.
Yeah.
And you know, so he was not meant to be taking bumps or doing anything. It was just meant to be sort of going forward with his storyline and on the road to that. But, you know, he couldn't help himself.
Yeah.
He couldn't help himself trying to help me a little bit. And so, yes, he's a mentor, a friend, and someone that I want to emulate, probably, yeah, most of all as a wrestler. So, yeah.
And then, you know, moving on from Charlie Roberts, and then getting to team up with Will Stone and forming SAS. How did that come about?
So I'd been sort of wrestling like as a singles guy for, I don't know, about a year or around thereabouts. And then they sort of said, well, we're thinking of teaming you up with Will, who had sort of just come through the training thing. So he was sort of 6 months behind me in terms of, you know, his training. And at first, to be honest, I was sort of like, well, why? Why are you going to put me with this guy? Like, I'm just getting over as a singles person. I've literally just won my first match as a singles person after a year.
Yeah.
And so and the crowd are reacting to me. The crowd are sort of getting into my stuff and sort of feeling my character. So shouldn't I just be continuing on to do that? Like, and sort of, but honestly, that was my first reaction. But the follow-up reaction to that was, you know what? I am a small fish in a big pond here. And there are many more people deserving of opportunities in the singles division than me on the roster. There are a lot more talented, a lot more experienced, and a lot more people sort of waiting in line, I guess, to be elevated. So actually becoming a tag team, you know, the tag team division at the time was, you know, pretty bare. It was pretty sparse. So I was like, actually, you know, it makes a lot of sense, because probably there's going to be a lot more space on the card for me as a tag team wrestler than there is as a singles guy at this point in time. I also love tag team wrestling, so, you know, I was always a huge fan of like watching the tag matches in the WWE when there was more focus on them in the sort of late 80s and early 90s. So I guess my second thought was actually, hey man, this could be pretty cool. And I liked Will. I thought he was a nice dude, a good dude, good attitude, great attitude, and you know, I'd enjoyed training with him, and I sort of, you know, like, I take things quite seriously, I guess, in wrestling, but he had the same sort of mindset in the sense that we're both trying to get better. We're trying to improve, and we want to work hard to achieve that. So it was never like difficult to, you know, talk that through, and, you know, whether it was we want to spend money on gear or shirts or designing stuff, or, you know, we want to try a new move or try something at training, like all of that stuff he was always 100% up for. And so I went from sort of being, I guess, maybe a little bit hesitant, not necessarily reluctant, but just hesitant and wondering if it was the best move for me, to sort of fully embracing it. And to be honest, I think maybe if I was just a tag team wrestler, I would get bored of tag team wrestling. But the fact that I get to wrestle singles for other promotions as well means that it's just like another kind of feather in my cap, and something that, another dimension of wrestling that I can enjoy. So that's sort of, I guess, how that came about.
And then, you know, becoming number one contenders for the New Zealand Tag Team Championships and getting to compete for those very championships on the biggest show ever, Nightmare Before Christmas. And unfortunately, you suffered a injury then.
Yeah.
But getting that opportunity to wrestle for your first, well, not essentially your first, but like your second championship. What was like the thought process and what you took? What did you take away from that besides the injury?
Well, I guess, like I knew that I was probably going to need surgery coming up. So I knew that I was going to be going away probably after Nightmare. And so it was kind of bittersweet to me. And also I was wrestling every weekend at that time. I was very busy, and I was very busy with my other work. So I was sort of doing these crazy hours and then wrestling on the weekends. And in some ways it just felt like another show. It just felt like, yeah, okay, what am I doing this weekend? Oh, I'm wrestling at Nightmare. But on the same token, like, the crowd, the atmosphere, the vibe was actually pretty special. And I think also maybe now looking back, we came together as a tag team. They had no idea if we would sort of really get over or people would be into us as a tag team. They had no plans for us to become the number one contenders, for us to sort of get to that point where we're aiming for the titles. That was never sort of in their wheelhouse when they put us together. It was just two guys who didn't necessarily have too much going on, maybe, but with some promise and some potential, and we'll see what happens. So I think it was very cool that they put that sort of investment and trust in us by that sort of after we were wrestling for about a year together, and by the beginning we were absolutely doing nothing, and by the end of it we'd sort of gotten over it as this tag team, and we were sort of being considered for that spot on the card in the tag realm. So that was very cool.
And you mentioned you were wrestling as a tag team mostly on IPW and then doing singles on other promotions. Getting the opportunity to wrestle for Maniacs United, and then getting the opportunity to become a number one contender for their Jackson Shield Championship, and walking away as the Jackson Shield champion, former Jackson Shield champion, but you were a champion of another promotion. What was the what did you take away from that? I was like, I got my first belt under.
Yeah, well, I guess I have to say that, I really appreciate Stacey giving me that opportunity. I think, first and foremost, I was very thankful that she saw something in me that she thought that I could, be a part of her, one of her important storylines, and that I could, sort of go up against, some of these, much more experienced people. So I am very thankful for that. My favourite matches that I've had have been at Maniacs United, and I had a match that I was very proud of against Charlie Roberts, and I had a match that I was very proud of against Liam Fury, and I had a match that I was very proud of and really enjoyed against Graham, a couple really. And so I guess what I loved about Maniacs United is that being given that opportunity to express myself in a different way as a singles competitor, in a different environment, in this really cool storyline, and so I loved it. I love wrestling for Maniacs, and I love that getting to participate in a long-term ongoing storyline, which I'm a storyteller. Like, I love stories. I love stories inside the ring, and I love angles and stories outside the ring. So I think it was really exciting for me, and a real privilege to get to do that and to get to wrestle some of the people that I did. And I was very proud of becoming Jackson Shield champion, and it was a very special night, a very special moment, and a very special match for me.
And obviously you won it off the former Jackson Shield champion, again, who was the standard hero, Graham Hughes. I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
And getting to not just wrestle him for the Jackson Shield championship, but getting to wrestle him not just once but all this multiple times, who, no offense to anyone, as the most experienced wrestler in the country.
Yeah.
What was the things you took away just from getting to wrestle someone who's, was part and came up from the system from the FWA Academy, which was known to the world as the best academy in the world before the Performance Center existed.
Yeah.
Getting to wrestle someone like him, what did you get to learn and take away from?
Well, I think that, for me, all my best matches have always been against people that are much, 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 much better than me. And so any time that I've really been happy or proud of a match, it's because I've been wrestling, someone super, super talented like Liam Fury, like Graham Hughes, like Charlie Roberts, and that has always, I've always felt that, they make you better, always, no matter what. And for me, just getting to spend some time with Graham was like a real privilege and a real honor. And like, I love the British style of wrestling, and my personal style is actually I'm not at all technically adept. I'm much more of a sort of a brawler and a sort of a smash mouth style guy, and with a sprinkling of like 80s retro stuff thrown in, but it's not really technical at all. But I actually love technical wrestling, and I love watching technical wrestling, and I love seeing how people like Graham go about their business. And so again, I guess it was an honor for me. He sort of made me feel, I guess, very, I'm always nervous before I get out because I want to have a good match and I want to do the best I can, but he always he was so calm out there and was always, so helpful and very, again, I guess in the same way that Charlie Roberts was very giving and not a selfish wrestler. So again, what I'm taking from these great wrestlers is that you don't have to go in and hit all your stuff. You don't have to go in and sort of be the man. It's all about working with your opponent and making them look good as well. So if you do, beat them, then you beat someone great, as opposed to, well, you just beat someone that no one saw had a chance in the first place. Right. So I think that, again, that selflessness and that kind of attitude about how can I work with my opponent to accentuate their strengths and hide their weaknesses is something that I, again, really took away. But to be honest, I think I just scratched the surface with Graham. Really and truly, I think that there would be many more matches and many more variables that we could do and try, and it would be up to me to sort of be good enough to do that, because we met at a time where I was very much not on par, and it will probably be 5 or 10 years before I'm sort of even just still not on par, but just a bit higher up that chain, and then we could do a whole bunch of different stuff. So I'd love that opportunity, but again, I guess I took a lot away from that, and I hope that we get to square off in the ring again many more times.
Nice. We touched on it a bit. You did suffer a injury.
Yes.
In your last match, which was for the New Zealand Tag Team Championships. How is your recovery going, and when do we expect Alex Savage back in the ring to crush skulls and smoke cigars again?
To be honest, I'm not sure. When I had this surgery, they sort of did a few different things, and basically they said they don't know. They said that sometimes people can recover quite quickly, and by quite quickly they mean half a year, and sometimes they say it takes longer, like 9 months, a year. And they also did say, that 1 in 4 people do not ever get back to that, that physical activity that they did before.
Right.
So there is that chance. So, I'm feeling stronger every day. I'm working hard to rehab, and, trying to stay focused on rehabbing. And I guess time will tell. I hope to be back in the ring, closer to that 6 months sort of time frame. But I sort of have to go based on the recommendations of my, my doctors and my physio and what they think. But I'm optimistic, and so I guess, sort of as Roddy Piper used to say, the only thing for sure is nothing's for sure.
Right.
And so I don't really know, but I'm hoping it's in the not too distant future.
Nice. What is next for Alex Savage?
Well, for me, I just want to get back in the ring. I want to get back to training. I want to get into, I've had this time off and time away, which in some ways has been good, just to sort of reflect on, what I want to be as a wrestler, like what I want to portray as a wrestler, what my sort of moveset is going to be, and how I'm going to work my matches. And so I've had a lot of pause for thought, and I want to introduce some new stuff and try some new things, and that starts at training. Obviously, I want to get my ring conditioning back. So I guess what I'm focused on, right now is rehabbing as well as I can, and then training as hard as I can. So when I'm tapped on the shoulder, both by my doctors and then by IPW management, then I'm ready to go, and not only am I ready to go, but I'm better than I was when I left. So I think that's probably my goal, is to come back better than I was when I left.
Is there anything or any advice that you would like to say to anyone?
I guess my only advice is that a lot of times, especially if you're a rookie starting out, or a new trainee, or even maybe sort of 6 months into your thing, there'll be a lot of things that you can't do and you are very intimidated by. But like that first bump, you do improve and you do get used to it. And now I look at the rookies coming through training now, and I remember when I couldn't run the ropes and how long it took me to learn, because it took me a lot longer than some of the other people, and a lot of the things I think took me longer to learn, or I had to work harder and I had to do that extra training. So I had to show up an extra day because I'm old, and it takes a while for things to kind of get drilled into my head.
Right.
And my body is not as adaptable when I cannot recover as quickly, after taking, 50 bumps.
Right.
And so, but in spite of all that, I did get there, and I got there because I didn't give up, and because I had that sort of grit and determination. And as long as you kind of maintain that grit and determination, regardless of how long it takes, you do have the potential to get there, but just got to stick around, and don't come into promotions with a bad attitude or a chip on your shoulder, or a sort of inflated ego. Come in respectful and humble and ready to work, and don't be worried about wins or losses. I try and think about, not in terms of wins and losses, but I try and think about in terms of match quality and whether I did the right things. And that stuff is secondary. And don't get me wrong, of course we all have our opinions and ideas of what we think is right for our character and what we think is right for our matches. But if you knuckle down and do the work, 9 times out of 10, you'll find that people do acknowledge and respect that. If you come in and have a shitty attitude and bitch and stuff, then it doesn't matter how great you are. Yep. So I guess those are my takeaways for people that are starting off in the biz.
Nice. Thank you very much for giving us an insight of Alex Savage, and hopefully we will see you in the 6 month mark.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys, and I will catch you guys on the next episode of Behind the Wrestler.